Welcome to the fun-filled world of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. In this lecture, I'm going to give you some background to 1st Corinthians to help you better understand what is going on there. So Corinth is a city that is located, it's a prominent city that is located along a major trade route. So Paul is keeping with his tactic that we've talked about before of traveling to a large city, planting some seeds of Christ followers, and then hoping that that will have a ripple effect and move outward. It is a young city, however, at the time that Paul visits it. It's only about 100 years old. It was reestablished in the year 44 before the Common Era. And so when he visits there, it hasn't been around for a very long time. And that's important. And this is important for you to understand because it is a new city. The social hierarchy is not set in stone quite yet. And within the ancient world, one of the ways in which things functioned was through an honor and shame system. Think back to maybe middle school, how if you showed up in a certain pair of shoes or with a certain friend, or you got a ride to school with a teenager or something like that, that your honor could go up. And that is kind of how it was in Corinth, because nothing, or if you were a new kid, I guess, in middle school, the possibilities were endless. You could have tons of honor or tons of shame. And so within Corinth, the way that you could get more honor, and this is true of the ancient world in general, is to take it from someone else, because honor was a zero-sum game. There was only, let's say, for the whole city of Corinth, there were 1,000 honor points available. And so if one of your friends had 10 and you only had 8, one way that you could gain more honor, and this is all fictitious, by the way, there weren't actual honor points, but one way that you could gain more honor is to shame your friend. In middle school, this may have manifested itself as making fun of their trapper keeper, or let's see here, beating somebody up on the bus, so like you gain more honor by beating them, so that sort of thing. So because it was such a young city, people were vying for honor, and people were hopeful that they could rise in the social hierarchy because it was so young and things were not set in stone yet. And so we're going to see a little bit of that tension kind of work itself out in the book of First Corinthians, because these Christians, the mainly Gentile Christians that are there, are Christians, but also hopeful that they can gain esteem for themselves. And we'll see how that kind of works itself out as we go. Corinth had access to major trade routes, and so it was a bustling city, and it also hosted something called the Isthmian Games. So something maybe like the Olympics, and so that would draw maybe some tourism and some travel to them. You can see where it's located here. It's right along the major trade route. If you wanted to get to Athens from the region, you'd have to go through Corinth and so forth. So this is an important area. So Paul's relationship with the Corinthians. Well, we know that Paul has been to Corinth already, that he has traveled there and that he has founded a church there. And then after he left, we find out, we also know that he maintains correspondence with them. And so we learn in 1 Corinthians 5 that 1 Corinthians is not actually 1 Corinthians, but in fact that Paul has written a previous letter. And so he really is maintaining correspondence with these early believers to try to help build their faith. One thing that we also learn is that other folks had come through Corinth after Paul left. It's not quite as bad as the folks that came through Galatia, but it's not great, because the other missionaries that have come through said, you know, you want to align yourself with Paul. He's not really all that wise, and he's not a great orator. And so maybe, just maybe, certain Christian factions were trying to say, I am an awesome Christian because Paul is the one who taught me the gospel. And then others came through trying to gain more honor for themselves and said, well, actually, Paul is not that honorable. He's not wise and he's not great at speaking. So maybe you should try to be on my team, be my brand of Christian. We still kind of do this today, don't we? Maybe like, oh, I go to this church or I go to this church. But that's the sort of thing that we sense from the way that Paul addresses the church at Corinth. He has a lot to say about wisdom and how he is super glad that they don't think he's wise, which I love about him. He writes in response to two separate issues. The first is that Chloe's people have come to him. So Chloe, probably a leader in one of the house churches in Corinth. So she's one of the church leaders there in Corinth. And she sends some of her servants to Paul to let him know that there is trouble in the church in Corinth and that he needs to address it. And then he also has to respond to a letter that he has received from the Corinthians. So those are kind of the guiding principles for what's going on. Paul has established a relationship with the Corinthians, and now he's writing to them. One, because Chloe's people have brought a negative report, and two, because the Corinthians have written to him and they've got some questions. So I'm going to leave it there for your background, and then we'll get into the meat of the letter.